All around the world, there are ancient sites that continue to baffle historians and archaeologists alike. Colossal stone monuments carved and transported with methods we still can't explain, artifacts that seem far too advanced for their time, and long-lost cities that suggest entire civilizations rose and fell long before recorded history ever began. For centuries, these places have raised more questions than answers, questions that remain unsolved thousands of years later. Tonight, we're exploring some of the most fascinating and mysterious discoveries of the ancient world. These aren't just stories or legends. They're real sites and discoveries that still leave experts divided, and the deeper you look, the stranger they become. As always with our videos, the visuals you'll see are there to give added context, but they aren't necessary to enjoy the journey. So whether you're here to fall asleep, listening in the background while you work, or just settling in for a night of mysteries, get comfortable and let the outside world fade away for a while. And before we dive in, make sure to subscribe. We upload new Ancient Mysteries documentaries every single week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, without further ado, let's begin deep in the forests of Siberia, with a wooden monument so old it predates the pyramids themselves. In the heart of the Ural Mountains in central Russia, a peat bog once swallowed the remains of a monument, unlike anything else from prehistory. Buried beneath layers of waterlogged soil, preserved by an accident of chemistry and time, lay a massive wooden figure that defied expectations of what humans were capable of creating more than 12,000 years ago. When workers cutting peat uncovered fragments of carved wood in 1890, no one realized they had found one of the oldest known monumental artworks on Earth, the Shigir Idol. When the pieces were cleaned and assembled, they revealed a towering figure carved from a single larch tree. The idol originally stood about 5.3 meters tall, roughly the height of a two-story building. Its surface was covered with a complex pattern of straight lines, zigzags, and geometric designs running in deliberate sequences across its body. On its front were several faces, stacked vertically one above another, their eyes wide and hollow, their features abstract yet unmistakably human. The first radiocarbon dating placed the Shigir Idol at around 9,000 years old, already older than any known wooden sculpture. Later analysis pushed the date even further back, to over 12,000 years, to a time when the last ice age had only just ended and the first forests were spreading across Eurasia. That makes it twice as old as Stonehenge, and thousands of years older than the first pyramids of Egypt. The idol was carved during the Mesolithic period, when most of northern Eurasia was still inhabited by hunter-gatherers. These were people usually thought to have lived simple lives, focused on survival. Yet the Shigir Idol shows an astonishing level of symbolism and planning. Each line and pattern was deliberate. The faces and geometric motifs suggest a narrative, perhaps a myth, a cosmology, or a set of instructions that once held meaning for its creators. But what that meaning was is still unknown. The carvings run the entire length of the idol, etched deeply into the wood. 7 faces can be identified, their eyes staring outward in calm symmetry. The lines between them form repeating motifs, perhaps dividing the figure into sections representing different realms or beings. Some archaeologists have proposed that the idol depicts a layered universe: sky, earth, and underworld, reflecting spiritual beliefs shared across early Eurasian cultures. Others see it as a warning marker, a boundary to a sacred space, or a representation of ancestral spirits. The lack of parallels leaves its interpretation wide open. The material used, a single larch trunk, suggests careful selection. The tree was at least 150 years old when it was cut, its trunk stripped, shaped, and carved using stone tools. The detail in the carvings shows precision far beyond simple ornamentation. Even the choice of tools and carving techniques appears standardized, implying that the people who made it had traditions of craftsmanship passed down over generations. At the time the idol was created, the region around the Urals was transforming. The glaciers had retreated, revealing vast forests and river valleys rich in game and plant life. Small communities of hunter-gatherers occupied this landscape, leaving behind stone tools, animal bones, and traces of hearths. The Shigir Idol stands out in this context because it belongs to a world without temples or cities, a world where art and religion were expressed through portable objects, body decoration, and small carvings. A monument over 5 meters tall would have dominated the surrounding landscape, visible from afar, commanding attention in a society that left almost nothing else on this scale. The geometric designs covering the idol resemble patterns found in other early Eurasian art. Zigzags, chevrons, and parallel lines often linked to spiritual or shamanic traditions. These shapes appear in Mesolithic carvings, pottery, and textiles across vast regions, hinting at shared symbolic language among widely separated peoples. Whether the Shigir idol represents gods, spirits, or ancestors, it demonstrates that its creators possessed both imagination and a deep understanding of wood as a medium. The idol's preservation is as remarkable as its creation. It survived because it was buried in the anaerobic mud of the Shigir peat bog, where bacteria could not decay the wood. The environment effectively sealed it off for over 10 millennia. When workers stumbled upon it, they recovered several sections but accidentally damaged parts of the figure. Later, reconstructions revealed its original scale and confirmed that it once stood upright, possibly anchored into the ground. How it ended up in the bog is uncertain. It may have been intentionally placed there as an offering, or it could have collapsed into the swamp after centuries of exposure. The mystery surrounding the idol extends to its purpose. Was it a deity? A guardian watching over the landscape? A visual story carved to record a myth now lost? The repeating patterns, combined with the human faces, suggest deliberate communication. Yet, without written records, the meaning is locked within the lines themselves. Unlike later civilizations that left inscriptions and texts, these people recorded their beliefs in symbols whose language we no longer speak. In its time, the idol would have stood in a landscape entirely different from today's forests. The post-glacial climate of the Urals was unstable, with frequent floods and shifting vegetation. Communities depended on seasonal resources and moved across wide territories. To invest the time and energy needed to carve a monument of this size suggests extraordinary motivation, spiritual, social, or both. It may have served as a gathering point, a marker of identity for groups who met seasonally to trade or perform rituals. The Shigir idol remains the oldest known example of a monumental wooden sculpture, but it is also one of the most cryptic. Every interpretation is provisional, every theory incomplete. Its age, its size, and its complexity stand as facts. But what the carved lines meant to the people who made them, and why they chose to preserve those faces in wood, remains one of the most enduring archaeological mysteries in human history. And as the idol's carved eyes continue to stare across time, the next mystery unfolds thousands of kilometers to the south, where another ancient monument was carved with equal precision. Not from wood, but from stone, on the Iberian Peninsula's far western edge. On the outskirts of Amman, the capital of Jordan, lies the site of Ain Ghazal, meaning spring of the gazelle. Beneath its soil, archaeologists uncovered a discovery that changed what we know about early human civilization. Hidden in layers of clay and plaster were dozens of life-size statues, human figures made thousands of years before the invention of writing, buried carefully, as if to conceal them forever. Ain Ghazal was one of the largest settlements of the pre-pottery Neolithic period, dating between 7,250 and 5,000 BC. It occupied a fertile stretch of land along the Zarqa River, covering more than 30 acres and supporting a population that may have reached several thousand. Its people were among the first to practice farming and animal domestication in the region. They built rectangular mud brick houses with plaster floors, raised goats, cultivated cereals, and still relied partly on hunting. The community was large, organized, and unlike the small villages of earlier farmers, it was already beginning to resemble a town. The discovery of the statues happened by accident in 1983 when construction crews expanding a highway cut into the edge of the site. Archaeologists were called in, and beneath layers of collapsed walls and refuse, they found caches of plaster figures. When the excavations expanded in 1985, more were uncovered, carefully buried in pits under house floors. Each statue was made from bundles of reeds coated in lime plaster, modeled into human form, and detailed with bitumen for the eyes. They stood about 1 meter tall, some taller, with long, slender necks and stylized faces. The eyes were large and dark, the bodies narrow, and the hands pressed close to the sides. A few of the figures were double-headed, 2 faces emerging from a single torso. Their meaning is still unknown. Archaeologists found that all of the statues had been buried soon after being made, sealed beneath layers of earth, and never meant to be seen again. The arrangement suggests a ritual purpose. They were made for a ceremony, used once, and then intentionally interred. Radiocarbon dates place the statues between 7,250 and 6,500 BC, making them some of the oldest large-scale human representations ever created. Their construction required enormous effort. Lime plaster was made by heating limestone to more than 800 degrees Celsius, an energy-intensive process that consumed vast amounts of wood. For a community living in a semi-arid landscape, dedicating so many resources to create art meant the act itself carried deep importance. The people of Ain Ghazal were living through a period of transformation. Across the Near East, villages were growing into towns, and farming was spreading along the Fertile Crescent. With agriculture came social hierarchy, communal ritual, and the first experiments in organized religion. The statues likely reflect this shift. They may represent ancestors, gods, or protective spirits. Their size and number suggest they were meant for public ceremonies rather than private worship. No 2 statues are identical, but all share the same abstract proportions. The faces are expressionless, their symmetry perfect. Some scholars believe they were modeled after deceased family members and then buried as substitutes for the dead, a way to keep the ancestors present within the home. Others argue they are not individuals at all, but symbolic beings, the embodiments of fertility or renewal. The double-headed figures might have signified duality, the balance of life and death or earth and sky. Without inscriptions, the meaning remains beyond recovery. The site itself provides more clues. Beneath the settlement, archaeologists uncovered multiple phases of construction. As the centuries passed, the community rebuilt itself over older layers, adding new houses on top of the ruins of the old. In several areas, burials were found under floors, the bodies carefully placed, sometimes with plastered skulls separated from their skeletons. This practice of removing and preserving skulls is found at other Neolithic sites like Jericho and Basamun, suggesting a shared belief system that venerated the ancestors as active members of society. The plaster statues may have been extensions of that same tradition, larger and more communal. The craftsmanship of the figures shows remarkable skill. Their surfaces are smooth and finely polished, the proportions balanced. The plaster was applied in multiple layers to achieve durability, then decorated with dark inlays for the eyes and faint traces of red pigment on the lips. These were not crude experiments. They reflect planning, teamwork, and technical knowledge. To produce dozens of figures required coordination across the community, from gathering materials to managing the kilns used to produce lime. By around 6,500 BC, Ain Ghazal began to decline. Environmental studies show deforestation and soil exhaustion in the region, the result of continuous agriculture and grazing. As the land degraded, food production faltered, and parts of the settlement were abandoned. The last phase of the site shows smaller houses and fewer artifacts. The statues may have been made during this period of stress, part of a ritual to restore harmony or to petition divine forces for survival. Their burial could represent the symbolic closing of that chapter. The artistic tradition of Ain Ghazal has few parallels. Smaller plaster figurines have been found at other Neolithic sites across the Levant, but nowhere else were they produced in such numbers or with such scale. The figures of Ain Ghazal appear to represent a unique development, a local innovation within a network of early farming cultures. They reflect both the individuality of the community and its connections to a broader world, experimenting with ritual and representation. What remains of the statues today are fragments and reconstructions, but their mystery endures. They stand at the threshold between prehistory and civilization, between symbolic expression and organized belief. Their purpose may have been forgotten, but their existence proves that by 7000 BC, humans were already creating monumental art that transcended survival, attempting to give form to abstract thought. The people who built Ain Ghazal lived at a time when the world was changing faster than ever before. They recorded that change not in writing but in sculpture, preserving their vision in plaster and earth. The statues still hold that vision, silent and unreadable, their black eyes staring across 9,000 years. Far to the west, another culture would soon begin shaping vast stone monuments, not buried in the ground, but rising high above it, etched into mountainsides and carved into the living rock. High in the Andes Mountains east of Lima, Peru, there is a plateau that sits more than 4,000 meters above sea level. It is called Marcahuasi, and it stretches across several square kilometers of exposed volcanic rock. The air is thin, the landscape barren. And yet for decades, this place has attracted attention for reasons that are hard to explain. Scattered across the plateau are massive stone formations that appear to take on familiar shapes, faces, and figures. Some see animals, others human profiles, and a few claim entire scenes are carved into the cliffs. The question that has puzzled researchers ever since these reports began is whether these shapes are the work of nature or the remains of something far older. The surface of Marcahuasi is made of volcanic tuff, a soft rock formed millions of years ago when ancient eruptions blanketed the region in ash. Over time, wind and water carved the rock into extraordinary forms. What makes the plateau unusual is the sheer number of these shapes and the way they seem to resemble recognizable figures when viewed from certain angles. There is a giant head with a long chin and prominent nose, a shape that resembles a lion, and another that looks like a frog crouched on its haunches. The most famous formation is known as the Monument to Humanity, a massive cliff face that appears to show multiple human profiles looking in different directions. Geologists explain these forms as pareidolia, the human tendency to find patterns where none exist. The volcanic rock, they argue, fractures naturally in ways that produce angular and rounded shapes similar to faces. Sunlight and shadow play their part, changing the outlines with each passing hour. The plateau first entered public attention in the 1950s when Peruvian explorer Daniel Russo documented the site extensively. He was convinced the formations were sculptures left by a civilization long forgotten, possibly predating all known cultures of the Andes. Russo photographed and mapped dozens of figures, naming them the face of the Inca, the African queen, the frog of fertility, and the monument to humanity. He believed they were intended to convey universal messages left by a prehistoric people who understood cosmic cycles. His ideas were met with skepticism, but the images he published captured imaginations across the world. Whatever their origin, the Marcahuasi formations stand among traces of genuine archaeological interest. Stone ruins, terraces, and small tombs have been found across the plateau, evidence that it was used by pre-Columbian peoples. Pottery fragments link it to early Andean cultures that thrived long before the rise of the Inca. These remains show that people once lived or conducted rituals here, though the exact purpose of the site is unclear. Some researchers propose it served as a ceremonial center, perhaps chosen for its striking natural shapes and commanding view of the surrounding mountains. The location of Marcahuasi would have made it ideal for ritual use. Its high altitude and clear skies offer panoramic views of the Andes, where peaks often align with solar and lunar cycles. Many Andean societies built shrines on elevated ground to connect with the spiritual forces they believed inhabited mountains, or apus. If the plateau's natural rock forms already suggested human or animal figures, Ancient people may have considered them manifestations of these mountain spirits and incorporated them into their ceremonies. Archaeological evidence across the Andes supports this connection between geography and belief. Inca and pre-Inca cultures often shaped natural features to emphasize their symbolic meaning, carving niches, steps, or altars into rock faces that already carried spiritual associations. At Marcahuasi, even minimal modifications could have enhanced the illusion of sculpted faces. Over thousands of years, erosion would have blurred the distinction between natural and human-made, leaving only the ambiguous shapes visible today. The monument to humanity remains the most debated of all. It is a large cliff that appears to show several faces of different proportions. Some observers claim to see profiles representing multiple races, suggesting that the formation was intentionally designed as a message about human unity. Others view it as coincidence, the result of intersecting fractures shaped by wind and rain. When seen under direct sunlight, the illusion is striking. Under shadow, the figures disappear completely. The uncertainty has kept the debate alive. Ancient people certainly knew of Marcahuasi. The plateau's proximity to known archaeological sites indicates it was part of a wider network of sacred landscapes. The Yauyos culture, which occupied the region before the Inca expansion, built stone settlements and agricultural terraces along the valley slopes below. For them, the plateau may have served as a place of pilgrimage or sky observation. Its open spaces and natural rock formations would have provided a dramatic setting for rituals dedicated to the heavens. No written records survive from the cultures that might have used Marcahuasi, leaving interpretation to archaeology and geology. Excavations have uncovered small circular dwellings, offering stones and tombs containing pottery, suggesting seasonal or ceremonial use rather than permanent habitation. If the plateau was a sanctuary, its isolation and altitude would have reinforced its sacredness. Reaching it requires traversing narrow trails that wind upward through thin air and rough terrain, a journey that itself could have held ritual significance. The mystery of Marcahuasi lies in the gap between geology and culture. On one hand, natural processes can easily account for the strange shapes. On the other, the evidence of human presence raises the possibility that ancient people recognized and perhaps altered these forms to align with their spiritual beliefs. Across the Andes, such interactions between nature and worship are common. The boundary between natural and artificial was often blurred, with mountains, stones, and even shadows considered living forces. The plateau's atmosphere adds to its mystery. At more than 4,000 meters, clouds move quickly across the landscape, casting shifting light that transforms the rocks from minute to minute. In one moment, a profile appears sharp and human. In the next, it fades into abstraction. It is easy to see how generations of visitors could see in these shapes the faces of gods, ancestors, or spirits. Whether Marcahuasi's figures are natural formations or remnants of forgotten sculpture remains unresolved. The evidence supports both possibilities. The geology explains the forms, but the presence of ancient settlements and altars nearby suggests that the site held special meaning for those who came long before written history. The stones themselves seem to have played a role in ritual life, whether shaped by nature or guided by human intent. Beyond the peaks of the Andes, another mystery awaits deep in the sands of Arabia, where the desert once swallowed entire cities, whose trade routes connected empires that have long since faded from memory. In the valley of the Nile, where Egypt's first cities began to rise, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a place that stood at the very foundation of Egyptian civilization. It was called Hierakonpolis, known in ancient times as Nekhen, and it flourished more than 5,000 years ago. Long before the pyramids, before the pharaohs unified Upper and Lower Egypt, Hierakonpolis was already a center of power and religion. Yet beneath its layers of temples and houses lies evidence of a disaster that almost erased it from history. A massive flood that struck with such force it left scars still visible in the ruins. Hierakonpolis stood on the west bank of the Nile, about 100 kilometers north of Aswan. It began as a small settlement during the pre-dynastic period around 4000 BC and grew into one of the largest urban centers of its time. At its height, it covered more than 100 hectares and supported thousands of inhabitants. Excavations revealed breweries, workshops, and sprawling cemeteries. The people who lived there painted their walls with scenes of boats, hunting, and ritual. One of the most famous artifacts ever found in Egypt, the Narmer palette, was discovered at the temple complex of Hierakonpolis. It depicts the unification of Egypt under a single ruler, suggesting that this city played a central role in the creation of the Egyptian state. Beneath these achievements, archaeologists found layers of silt and clay mixed with broken pottery and collapsed walls. The evidence pointed to a sudden, destructive flood that inundated large parts of the city. Unlike the predictable annual rise of the Nile that renewed the soil each year, this was a catastrophe. The depth and reach of the flood deposits showed it was far beyond normal seasonal levels. Houses built along the riverbank were buried, their walls undermined and tilted by the rushing water. In some places, entire floors of workshops and homes were sealed under fine layers of mud. The Nile's floods were usually celebrated, but they could also destroy. Ancient records from later dynasties describe years when the river rose too high, sweeping away villages and livestock. The flood that hit Hierakonpolis seems to have occurred in a much earlier age, long before writing or formal record-keeping. Its cause remains uncertain. It may have been triggered by extreme rainfall upstream or by changes in the river's course during a period of climatic instability at the end of the 4th millennium BC. The sediment left behind suggests the water carried a heavy load of silt, consistent with a massive inundation that spread well beyond the normal floodplain. The flood did more than damage buildings. It preserved a snapshot of daily life at the dawn of Egyptian civilization. Under the silt, archaeologists found tools, food remains, and pottery sealed in the same positions they had been left when the water rose. In some areas, kilns filled with half-fired pottery lay buried under the flood layer, as if workers had fled mid-task. The suddenness of the event is clear in the way ordinary objects were trapped beneath mud without any sign of deliberate burial. In the layers above the flood deposits, new structures appear, showing that the city was rebuilt. Yet the rebuilding took a different form. The architecture shifted away from the low riverbanks to higher ground. The flood may have forced the people of Hierakonpolis to reconsider how and where they built, shaping the city's later development. The temple precincts that dominated the site in later centuries were placed safely above the high water mark. The flood also left a deeper mark on the cultural memory of the region. Water was both life and death in Egypt. The earliest myths describe creation as the emergence of land from the primeval waters of chaos. It is possible that real floods, like the one at Hierakonpolis, helped form these ideas. For the people who lived through it, the disaster would have been both terrifying and awe-inspiring, a moment when the natural order broke apart and then was restored. The disaster struck during a critical time in Egypt's development. Across the Nile Valley, small kingdoms were consolidating, competing for resources and power. Hierakonpolis, already a leading center, may have used the rebuilding process to strengthen its authority. The disaster could have inspired new religious or political expressions that tied leadership to control over the forces of nature. By the time Egypt's first kings emerged around 3100 BC, the memory of floods and renewal was already central to royal ideology. The flood layers at Hierakonpolis also provide clues to the environment of early Egypt. Pollen and sediment studies from the area show that the climate around 3600 BC was wetter than today. The Sahara to the west still supported grasslands, and seasonal storms occasionally pushed the Nile to dangerous heights. Hierakonpolis was perfectly positioned to benefit from these fertile conditions, but also vulnerable to their extremes. The flood that struck the city may have been one of several over centuries, each shaping how people interacted with the river that sustained them. No written record of the flood survives, and no graves have yet been linked to the disaster. Yet its presence in the ground tells its own story. The layers of silt, that buried the lower parts of the city show that nature's power was something even early Egyptians could not fully control. The evidence of rebuilding above those layers shows their resilience and determination to stay near the river despite the risks. The balance between destruction and renewal seen here would later become one of the defining symbols of Egyptian civilization. The lost flood of Hierakonpolis stands as one of the earliest natural disasters known from the Nile Valley, preserved not in legend, but in soil. It connects the beginnings of urban life in Egypt to the unpredictable rhythms of the river that both nourished and threatened it. The physical traces remain silent about how many lives it claimed or how it changed belief, but its mark on the archaeological record is unmistakable. As the ancient floodwaters of Hierakonpolis reshaped the cradle of Egyptian civilization, another catastrophe was unfolding far to the west, where a temple dedicated to a foreign god would meet its end not through water, but through fire. High in the cloud forests of northern Peru, the Chachapoya people built their settlements along ridges and mountaintops, earning them the name Warriors of the Clouds from later Inca chroniclers. Their stone cities, cliff tombs, and striking mummies are impressive enough, but woven into the stories of this remote region is an account that stands apart from the usual archaeology, the tale of a sky flame that terrified the Chachapoya and left a mark on local memory. The Chachapoya culture flourished from around 800 AD until their conquest by the Inca in the 15th century. Their homeland stretched along the eastern slopes of the Andes, where the mountains drop sharply into the Amazon basin. This terrain is rugged, covered in cloud forest, with frequent mist and sudden weather shifts. Archaeologists have documented fortified settlements like Cuelap, a massive stone complex sometimes called the Machu Picchu of the north. They built circular houses, decorated stone walls with geometric friezes, and carved sarcophagi in the shape of stylized human figures that still perch on cliff faces. Spanish chroniclers, who encountered the Chachapoya after the Inca had already subdued them, described them as fierce warriors and skilled builders, but they also recorded strange stories passed down through oral tradition. Among these accounts is one of a great flame in the sky, an event that supposedly occurred before Spanish arrival, but was vivid enough to be remembered generations later. The details vary, but most versions describe a fiery object streaking across the heavens, illuminating the night and filling the air with noise. Some texts suggest it crashed in the mountains, others that it passed overhead and disappeared. For the Chachapoya, who lived in a world of omens and gods tied to the natural landscape, such a sight would have carried deep meaning. The Inca and later the Spanish chroniclers framed it as a portent, something extraordinary that the people could not ignore. So what was the sky flame? Historians and scientists have offered a few possibilities. The most straightforward is that the Chachapoya witnessed a large meteor or bolide. These are meteors that explode in the atmosphere with tremendous energy, producing fireballs, shock waves, and in some cases, fragments that reach the ground. Even in recent times, events like the 1908 Tunguska explosion in Siberia or the 2013 Chelyabinsk meteor over Russia show just how dramatic such phenomena can be. For people without modern explanations, a fireball lighting up the mountains would easily become a story repeated for centuries. The Andes provide a dramatic backdrop for such events. At high altitude, with clear night skies, meteors appear especially bright. Local traditions throughout the region include stories of stars falling to earth, fiery omens, and lights in the heavens. The Chachapoya sky flame may be one of these remembered events. Another possibility is volcanic activity. Northern Peru sits near zones of geological instability, though the Chachapoya region itself does not have major volcanoes. Still, distant eruptions can produce atmospheric effects visible hundreds of kilometers away. Some have speculated that a volcanic eruption elsewhere in the Andes could have lit the sky, with the glow carried in oral tradition as a flame overhead. There is also the chance that the event was a comet. Bright comets periodically appear in the sky, sometimes with tails visible for weeks. In cultures around the world, comets have been remembered as fiery visitors, often interpreted as warnings or heralds of change. If a bright comet appeared during the Chachapoya's time, it could have been passed down as the sky flame. Whatever the cause, the story is notable for how it survived in historical records. Unlike a mythological tale detached from specific time and place, the chroniclers recorded it as a remembered event, an actual happening that people claimed their ancestors had witnessed. That distinction makes it valuable, a rare glimpse into how ancient Andean peoples understood extraordinary natural phenomena. The Chachapoya themselves remain somewhat mysterious in the archaeological record. Their cities were later incorporated into the Inca Empire, and much of their heritage was altered or lost in that process. Yet their distinctive traditions endure. The cliff sarcophagi at Karagia, with their oversized heads and painted faces, still stare across valleys. Mummies found in caves, wrapped in layers of textiles and preserved by the cold, give insight into burial customs. Their architecture at Cuelap shows planning and communal effort comparable to better-known Inca works. The sky flame sits alongside these tangible remains as a reminder that the Chachapoya were also careful observers of the world around them. Living in cloud forests with constant shifting weather, they would have been attuned to unusual changes in the sky. An event powerful enough to be remembered long after their political defeat suggests it had an enormous impact on them. Archaeologists investigating Chachapoya settlements often find that ritual spaces were integrated into their cities. At Cuelap, for instance, circular buildings include remains interpreted as offering pits. Carved stones and symbolic designs suggest that celestial events were connected to their spiritual life. The memory of a fiery sky event would have fit into this worldview, reinforcing the idea that the heavens and the earth were closely linked. Spanish chroniclers, writing decades after the conquest, sometimes interpreted these stories through their own frameworks. To them, fiery signs in the sky often suggested divine approval or punishment. But stripped of that lens, the Chachapoya story reads like a preserved memory of a natural event, a bolide, comet, or atmospheric explosion that simply had no better explanation in its time. Today, researchers continue to revisit these accounts, comparing them with known astronomical or geological events. While no definitive answer exists, the consistency of such stories across different Andean cultures shows how important sky phenomena were to ancient peoples. They were rare, dramatic, and unforgettable. And as the Chachapoya told stories of fire streaking through the heavens, our next mystery takes us far across the world to Roman Britain, where an entire legion of soldiers disappeared from the record without explanation. The Roman army was known for its discipline, its iron organization, and its ability to stamp out rebellion across an empire stretching from the deserts of Syria to the forests of Britain. Yet one of Rome's legions, the 9th Hispana, slipped out of the historical record so completely that its fate has been debated for centuries. The disappearance of the 9th has become one of the most famous unsolved mysteries of Roman history. The 9th Legion had a long pedigree. It may have been raised originally by Julius Caesar during his campaigns in Gaul in the mid-1st century BC. Units bearing the name 9th fought in Caesar's conquest of Gaul, and later at the decisive Battle of Pharsalus in the Roman civil wars. After Caesar's assassination, the legion was reconstituted and fought under Augustus, Rome's first emperor, serving in Hispania, modern Spain, where it earned the title Hispana. By the early 1st century AD, the 9th was stationed in Britain. Roman forces invaded the island in AD 43 under Emperor Claudius, establishing control over much of southern England. The conquest was far from easy. Tribes in Wales and the north resisted fiercely, and the 9th was heavily involved in these campaigns. In AD 60 or 61, during the revolt of the Iceni led by Queen Boudica, the 9th suffered a major defeat. Marching to relieve the Roman settlement at Camulodunum, modern Colchester, the legion was ambushed. According to Tacitus, most of its infantry was wiped out. Only the cavalry escaped. The legion was rebuilt, but the loss haunted its reputation. After Boudica's revolt, The ninth remained in Britain, headquartered at York, then known as Eboracum. Inscriptions and tile stamps confirm their presence there well into the early 2nd century. Then, suddenly, the record grows thin. By around A.D. 120, mentions of the 9th Hispana disappear. Other legions stationed in Britain, like the 2nd Augusta or the 20th Valeria Victrix, continue to be documented, but the 9th is missing. This absence gave rise to the theory that the legion was destroyed in battle in Britain, possibly during a campaign against northern tribes in what is now Scotland. The idea was popularized in the 20th century by historians and later by the novel The Eagle of the Ninth, which imagined the legion annihilated beyond Hadrian's Wall. Archaeological evidence shows that Roman forts in Scotland were attacked and burned in the early 2nd century, which might suggest heavy fighting in the region. Could the 9th have marched north and never returned? Yet this theory faces problems. The construction of Hadrian's Wall began in AD 122 under Emperor Hadrian, with the aim of controlling movement between Roman Britain and the unconquered north. If the 9th had been wiped out in a disaster just years earlier, one might expect contemporary sources to mention it. Roman historians were not shy about recording major defeats. The loss of legions in Germany at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest in AD 9 was written about in detail. The silence surrounding the 9th suggests its fate may have been less dramatic, though no less puzzling. An alternative theory is that the legion was transferred out of Britain and met its end elsewhere. Evidence hints at the 9th's possible presence in the Rhine frontier or in the eastern provinces. A tile stamp found in Nijmegen in the Netherlands has been attributed to the 9th, dated perhaps around AD 120. If authentic, it would mean the legion had been moved from Britain to the continent. From there, it could have been redeployed to dangerous frontiers in the east. Rome faced major conflicts in Judea during the Bar Kokhba Revolt, 132 to 136 AD, and in Armenia and Parthia. A legion disappearing in these theaters would not be unprecedented. Some scholars suggest the legion was quietly disbanded. Manpower shortages, heavy casualties spread over multiple campaigns, or political reshuffling could have led to its absorption into other units. Inscriptions in Britain after AD 120 show different legions stationed at York, with no mention of the 9th. This could reflect a simple reorganization, though it doesn't explain why the 9th's name was erased so completely. What makes the case so intriguing is the lack of closure. Inscriptions stop. Literary references dry up. Archaeology provides only hints. The disappearance left a gap big enough to inspire centuries of speculation. Was the 9th wiped out by northern tribes in a dramatic ambush? Did it fade away in the sands of the east, destroyed in an obscure campaign? Or was it quietly dissolved, its name struck off the rolls of the empire? The 9th story is also a window into the realities of Roman imperial rule. Britain was Rome's far-flung frontier, costly to hold and constantly tested by rebellion. The legions stationed there endured harsh conditions, long supply lines, and enemies who knew the terrain. York, the legion's base, became a major Roman city, but it was always on edge, guarding the approaches to the north. Losing an entire legion there would have been catastrophic for Rome's control of the island. Meanwhile, on the continent, legions were Rome's blunt instrument against revolt and invasion. When provinces flared up, the emperor often shifted legions from one frontier to another, sometimes with disastrous results. Records were not always precise, and not every defeat was memorialized. The fate of the 9th may be one of these lost chapters, important at the time, but forgotten by later writers. Modern archaeology continues to search for answers. Excavations at Roman forts in Scotland and along Hadrian's Wall look for signs of large-scale destruction that might indicate the legion's end. Scholars re-examine inscriptions for overlooked references, yet the mystery remains, which is part of why the 9th continues to capture imagination in both scholarship and popular culture. What is certain is that by the mid-2nd century, the 9th Hispana no longer existed. Its disappearance is a reminder that even Rome, with its vast records and monuments, could lose track of entire legions. The silence left behind is as striking as the legion's centuries of service, and with the fate of the ninth still unsettled, we turn to another disappearance altogether, one set not in Europe, but in Central America, where a small terracotta head raised questions about connections that should not have been possible. In the highlands of central Mexico, among the ruins of a small pre-Columbian settlement near the city of Toluca, archaeologists in the 1930s uncovered an artifact that continues to challenge established history. It was found buried among offerings in a grave surrounded by pottery, textiles, and ornaments that dated firmly to the late pre-Hispanic period. Yet this single object did not resemble anything made in Mesoamerica. It was a small terracotta head, no larger than a fist, depicting a bearded man with distinctly non-American features. The site, known as Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca, was part of a network of settlements occupied from around the 12th to 15th centuries AD. The inhabitants were linked culturally to the Matlatzinca, and later, the expanding Aztec Empire. The burial where the head was discovered was typical for the region, containing grave goods that reflected high status, copper bells, turquoise beads, and painted ceramics. Everything about it pointed to local traditions, except for the head itself. Its style, with its sharp nose, almond-shaped eyes, and full beard, looked strikingly Mediterranean. The object was first described in detail by Mexican archaeologist José García Payón, who directed the excavation in 1933. He cataloged it as part of the burial assemblage and noted its unique appearance, but at the time, few paid much attention. It was only decades later, when his excavation notes were revisited, that scholars realized how anomalous the find truly was. The head appeared to resemble Roman or Hellenistic terracotta figurines, objects produced in the Mediterranean more than 1,000 years earlier and half a world away. The idea that a Roman-style artifact could be found in a pre-Columbian Mexican grave raised immediate controversy. Radiocarbon dating was impossible for the object itself, but the burial context left little doubt about its antiquity. The other items in the grave belonged to the post-classic period, around the 14th century AD, long before European contact. That meant the head had to have arrived in Mexico centuries before Columbus. In the 1990s, scientists subjected the head to thermoluminescence testing at the Max Planck Institute in Germany to determine when its clay was last fired. The results suggested a wide range of possible dates between the 9th century BC and the 13th century AD. This proved it was indeed ancient, though the test could not determine its geographic origin. The clay was not local to central Mexico, but neither did it match any known Mediterranean deposits. The mystery deepened. Some researchers proposed that the head might have arrived through transoceanic contact, perhaps brought across the Atlantic by accident or trade. Others speculated it could have been introduced into the burial long after its creation, either as a European object that found its way into indigenous hands or as a later intrusion. Yet, there was no sign of disturbance in the burial layers. The head had been sealed in place when the grave was first closed, along with the other offerings. The features of the figure made explanations difficult. No known Mesoamerican culture portrayed bearded men with realistic facial proportions. In art across the region, human figures are stylized and hairless, and facial hair is virtually absent. To depict a beard was unprecedented. This one detail convinced many observers that the object could not have been made in the Americas. Several theories emerged to explain the anomaly. One suggested it could have been created by a local artist influenced by foreign traders, though no evidence of such contact exists. Another proposed it was an imitation made by indigenous artisans using unfamiliar motifs brought from distant lands. The most radical theory claimed it was a genuine Roman artifact, perhaps carried across the ocean by shipwreck survivors during the early centuries AD. Advocates of this view pointed to the presence of Roman glass beads and coins in other distant regions of the Old World, arguing that maritime drift or chance voyages might have spread objects even further. Skeptics countered that while the head was old, its resemblance to Roman art might be coincidental. Simple geometric features could easily align with Mediterranean styles by chance. They also argued that isolated anomalies cannot overturn an entire historical framework. Without other evidence of Mediterranean contact in the Americas, no tools, inscriptions, or architecture, the head alone could not prove anything beyond its own mystery. Still, the object refuses to fit comfortably within any known category. If it were an imported artifact, how did it reach the Toluca Valley more than 1,000 years before the Spanish? If it were a later European intrusion, why was it buried in an undisturbed context with objects datable to the 15th century? The answers remain elusive. The location of the find adds another layer to the puzzle. Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca was strategically positioned in a high mountain basin along trade routes connecting central Mexico with the Pacific coast. Traders known as Pochteca moved goods across long distances, carrying obsidian, salt, cacao, and exotic items. It is conceivable that rare foreign objects could have traveled great distances through exchange networks. But across centuries of excavation, no other artifacts of clearly Old World origin have ever been found in comparable contexts in Mesoamerica. The head's craftsmanship also resists classification. The clay is fine-grained, its surface smooth, and fired at a high temperature consistent with advanced kiln techniques. The expression is realistic, with carefully molded features. The figure's proportions and style match Roman figurines produced in the Eastern Mediterranean between the 2nd century BC and the 2nd century AD, though no identical examples are known. For those who view the artifact as evidence of ancient contact, the implications are enormous. It would mean that ships from the Old World reached the Americas long before Viking voyages to North America and more than a millennium before Columbus. Yet extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the solitary head of Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca stands alone, a single artifact without context or comparison. Despite the skepticism, its existence cannot be ignored. The object is real, its material ancient, its discovery well documented. The puzzle lies in how it came to rest in a pre-Columbian grave. Whether it was carried across the ocean by accident, passed through countless hands along forgotten routes, or simply created locally in an unfamiliar style, its presence challenges the accepted boundaries of history. No inscription marks its surface. No record explains its journey. All that remains is a small terracotta face with a beard, staring up from the soil of Mexico, silent evidence of either the greatest coincidence in archaeology or a connection between worlds that has yet to be understood. As the mystery of the Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca Head continues to defy explanation, another ancient puzzle emerges on the far side of the world. A city carved from stone high in the mountains of Afghanistan that once blended Greek architecture with Eastern traditions before disappearing entirely. Now it's your turn. Let me know if I missed any topics you'd like to see in a part 2 of this series. And if you enjoyed this video, then click the video on screen now to listen to another one of our Ancient Mysteries series. Thanks for watching, and as always, until next time, stay curious.